Hey, what's up, everybody? This is your host, Irvin, and
Che Baker.
this is Shining Spotlight, the show where we highlight the creatives in order to inspire you guys. Today, we have a creator with an amazing style that brings joy and laughter to many. He has been nominated for a Ringo and a Canvas Award, but more importantly, he's won a Glyph Award for his world-renowned comic strip, Beware of Toddler. Today, we welcome the great George Gant onto the show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, George, for coming on.
Yo, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So, I'm honestly I've been following your webcomic for, actually for quite a while now online, especially on Facebook. Definitely brings a lot of laughter to me. It's really fun, and you guys should be able to see some of the characters right now on the screen from Beware of Toddler. Of course, you have the Toddler, and you have, of course, Dwayne, aka Daddy. So can you tell us a little bit about what your inspiration was for the comic? I can speculate, but I'd rather hear it straight from, your perspective and your take.
Okay. So, Beware of Toddler, at least in the beginning, was directly taken from my own life and my own experiences. At the time, I was doing a stay-at-home dad thing. My daughter was 2 years old at the time. We played this game of hide and seek. Every once in a while, I'll just pick a random hiding spot in our house, and I'll see if she can find me. And this is like a little fun game. And I did so one day, and I just hid in the closet. And I'm thinking she's not gonna find me for a bit, 5-10 minutes, whatnot. And this little girl just found me right away. Um, and it blew my mind, and I thought it was so funny that I just drew up a comic on it. I drew it up, threw it on Facebook, and the response was pretty big. Especially for something that I've done, in my opinion. And I've got these people telling me, "Hey, this could be something. You should do more of these."
Yeah.
And then so I did another one. Like a couple days later, um, Tyler's got a crayon in her mouth, and then his dad's chasing her around. Really simple stuff. I don't even think there was a joke to it. It was just something that happens, and that one became even bigger. And so now I'm thinking, okay, I should really do something here. And so I just kept doing them here and there. It's been 5 years now, and here we are.
And that's the thing. It's so relatable, and that's what caught my attention too as a fan. I was just noticing. I'm like, wow, this is such a relatable thing to just show the dynamic between a dad and his daughter, and just the imagination behind it. So I was wondering, how long have you been drawing in general?
Oh, in general, like the vast majority of my life, to be honest. I can remember being 8 or 9 and deciding, hey, I want to pick up a pencil. I want to draw cartoons. So I was like one of those kids who always draw in class. Don't ask me math, or don't ask me
Right.
social studies, but I would draw something in class all day, every day. Um, to the point where in high school, I found myself doing editorials for the school newspaper.
Mm.
I actually won some awards based on that. I won 4 citywide awards, which is a pretty big deal considering I am from and I still live in Chicago. So these are huge Chicago-based awards.
So you're kind of like our sister rival city. We're from the D, Detroit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I won't bring up the Pistons Bulls stuff. I'll
Don't do it. That's a long-standing rival. We might have to stop the interview. I'm just kidding.
no, but yeah. So I won those awards, and of course, you know how it is. You get older, you kind of fall out of favor of things. So I stopped drawing for a while, after high school, and then I just picked it back up sometime in college, because around this time, when the web comics really started coming about.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people think it's because of Webtoon and things like that. But before Webtoon, like there were all these web comics like Penny Arcade and things like that. Like they were huge, and they were showing people that you didn't have to be in newspapers, you didn't have to be syndicated to make a comic and to get it out there. Um, so I launched a webcomic. Like I guess it's been about 20 years now. It was a gaming webcomic. It was like just like all the webcomics back then were basically gaming webcomics. So so I did one of those. A couple years later, I did one called On the Grind,
Hmm.
and you may have seen that one because that one was kind of big at the time. Like um at least like when it comes to me, like I produce more of those than I produce anything else.
Hmm.
So and that comic was about also taken from my own experiences, but this time this was about my experiences in the retail industry and at the time working in coffee shops. Um and just being like the crazy things you see as 20 something in a coffee shop and like the wild crazy customers and all that kind of stuff. Um so I did that for a few years. Eventually, I went back to my first web comic. Made it a kid friendly comic because it wasn't as kid friendly beforehand. Did that for a few years, and then the hide and seek game happened, and Beware Toddler kind of just threw everything out of whack.
So I like the fact that you mentioned it's from your experiences, because one of the things
Right.
that we like to talk a lot about on this show is, you know, if you're a creator out there, for people who maybe are aspiring creators, um, instead of just making a story that's based off of, or off of another story. Like some people might be like, I really like, I don't know, Ichigo. Let me make another version of Ichigo from Bleach, or Luffy from One Piece, or something like that. You actually pulled from your own experience, like, okay, worked in retail, I'm gonna go ahead and pour in my own experiences and make characters out of that. Or I have a toddler, we played a game of hide and go seek. So where I'm gonna go with, or where I want to ask you about with that, is from you doing that and being able to craft your own character. What has been your process in terms of actually doing that? What do you do when you work on Beware of Toddler? What materials do you use? What kind of frame of mind do you get in when you actually create?
Well, with Beware Toddler, um, and this is kind of like a two-part thing for me because well, one thing about Beware Toddler is that as of the last 2 years, Beware Toddler is a syndicated comic and it is in newspapers. So my approach has kind of changed since then. Um, Originally with Beware Toddler, I would just think like it was very spontaneous. I would just like either see something that my daughter did or just think of something funny that she's done or there's something I see that toddlers do, and I would just base a comic around that thing. Um and I would just draw up a comic like that day or the very next day. It wasn't very thought out or planned out. It's very spur of the moment. Even while drawing the comic, I like rewrite the comic almost like an improv type thing. Like there was no real organization there. Um, since being syndicated, I have to do things a bit differently, and I actually have to plan ahead. So so my process now, and as far as like the materials, it's all done digitally at this point. Drawing tablet and Clip Studio Paint, like start to finish.
Hmm.
Um, I as like going back to like how I do the comics now, like because I have to have them X amount of weeks in advance. I try to still try to think of things that toddlers do, things that my daughter has done in the past, even things that even though she's not 2 years old anymore, that she'll do today that I can see a 2 year old doing. But then I'll plan it like further ahead,
Right.
and or now in this case, like I have to pay attention to like times of year, holidays, and things like that, and just try to go around that. Um, Also, a thing that I do now is I try to make current comics kind of like little mini sequels to old comics.
Hmm.
So that it's almost like I'm continuing a story that I did like 3 years ago, but it kind of takes place in the same day if you think about it, because they're all 2 years old. But I know it isn't very involved, and it's kind of a simple thing, but that's pretty much how I go about making the comics these days.
Okay.
So do you ever do anything? Because I know some people prefer to do just digital. Some people do traditional. Do you do any traditional work too, or is it all digital?
It's all digital. Any traditional work I do is kind of just like for me, like sketches and things like that. Um, I've been trying to get back into traditional art. Like I just like threw a bunch of sketch books back there, um, just to challenge myself because it's been so long. Um, and as far as me, like the digital thing, it isn't like one of those things where I think that it's easier. I like computers. That's all. So I like technology and things like that. So I tend to gravitate towards like technology and things of that nature. But I still make sure I've still got my pens. I've still got my pencils. I've still got my sketchbooks. Um, I try to actually draw a comic out traditionally for the 5th anniversary. And so I actually did the pencils traditionally, but I did everything else digitally. So I may do that more often, um, just to challenge myself and to have a little more fun and to not do the same things like over and over again. So things don't get boring. But but the end result is almost always just done completely digitally.
Okay. And I guess my next question would be, how do you manage like work life balance in regards to managing family and also continuing to put out like product consistently to keep the fan base going?
Well, the easy answer is I don't. I'm very exhausted, but
Yeah.
realistically, it's one of those things that just kind of comes with experience.
Mhm.
Like I'm lucky in the sense that producing these comics at this point is my full-time job. Um, I hope to see full-time money eventually. Um, but because the comics are syndicated, that's kind of like my main priority. Um, and I also have another comic strip that I'm working on at the time too, for work. But for me, I do believe that you have to have a balance with everything. So I'm up, take the kids to school, and I'm working throughout the day. Um, Once they come home from school, I try to relax a bit, or at least I try to plan a bit. And then once they're in bed, I'm pretty much back to work, or I'm sleeping, or I'm playing video games.
I'm a gamer too.
Me
I'm
Like
like
too.
so, yeah.
PC gamer.
Oh, I play everything. Like trust me, that's not a conversation we want to start because we will never talk about comics again.
Because that was the next question was like, what's your favorite? But it's like, you know what? Let me tread lightly. Let me tread lightly. Once you said that, if we all said gamer, we might be stuck here all night.
Hey, well, let me tell you guys something. Like back here, like these sketchbooks and things. This morning, those were all video game cases.
Oh wow.
Really?
Yeah, I'm trying to clean up a bit, and I ran out of space. So I have to put the games away. But yeah, like just trying to keep yourself from burning out and just knowing how to schedule yourself out, and you really have to plan ahead. And you really have
Yeah.
to think ahead. You have to think 2 steps ahead. Like I've got to get this done by this day so I can work on this thing by this day,
Right.
and I've got this deadline by this day. Um, it 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 becomes easier the longer you do it, but it's like a balancing act. Like you've got to really like be on top of it, and as long as can do it, get it done, get to work, do what you have to do while taking care of your family and yourself and your health. It's easier said than done, but it is not impossible.
So I'm gonna ask you a question. It's gonna be slightly personal, but if you don't want to answer it, that's perfectly fine. And I apologize if hopefully it's not offensive or anything like that.
Mhm.
But how does your daughter feel about Beware of Tyler? Does she enjoy the comic?
Um, It's kind of weird because I have an older son. He likes it more than her. And she's kind of like in the I just want to play with my toys phase of our life, so she doesn't really care so much about the comic. Like when she was a bit younger, she understands that the comic was initially based on her. Now not so much because I have tried to separate the two. Like the longer it goes on, the more I want them to be separate because I don't want her to go into like school and say, hey, look, I was looking at the newspaper and there's this comic, little girl looks like you. Yeah, my daddy does that, blah, 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 blah. And then that could possibly create problems down the line. But like now, like she really doesn't care. She, to her, that's just me working. And I don't think like when she was younger, she kind of got it. And maybe she won't get it again until she's older. But that's not really something I have to worry about right now.
And that's the thing, you know, Beware of a Toddler is capturing a specific time period anyways with being toddlers. So developmentally, a lot of kids are in their own like world by a certain time. So that's a good point. And I was wondering what other inspirations outside of just, you know, family, what are some of your actual inspirations in regards to being a creative in general?
Oh, well, with me, so of course I grew up on the video games. So I've always been inspired. Like some of my early stuff, like you think, hey, this guy plays Sonic the Hedgehog. So I was always like inspired by that kind of stuff. But for me, primarily because I came up in like the newspaper comics age. Well, during that time, like in the 80s and 90s. I mean, that time still exists, but so I was like a big Calvin
like Garfield.
Yeah, like Garfield, like Garfield and Peanuts. Calvin and Hobbes was like the greatest thing in the world to me at one point. Like TV cartoons, like TMNT was like everything.
Yeah.
And so like in fact, like I think the first thing that I think I tried to draw was a turtle. And so like so I've got those Peanuts, Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes. And then as an adult, there was like the Boondocks, of course. Right. Like I'm lucky in that sense because I watched a show and it actually introduced me to the comics. And the comics was one of those things. In addition to like Penny Arcade, where hey, I want to do this. So you've got Penny Arcade, and you've got Penny Arcade as well. The Boondocks was a big one. And the great thing about being a creative is you don't ever stop being inspired. So like even now, I've been like interested in like the old like Donald Duck, Uncle Scrooge comics. You know, that inspired DuckTales. There I'm like drawing a blank right here. Pogo, Walt Kelly's Pogo. Has caught my attention lately. And like just like all these other ones, you know, you got Curtis, you got Jumpstart, like just like newspaper comics. And like newspaper comics of that era, like cartoons of like the 80s and 90s, and like video games of the 80s and 90s, pretty much what shaped my style, or what shaped what I like. The fact that I get to do this, I wouldn't do if it weren't for any of those.
You know, it's funny with newspaper comics. Newspaper comics have paved the way for all of comics, you know, right. Like historically, you know, comic strips and everything. If you didn't have comic strips, you wouldn't have, even when people talk about like, you know, I'm just going to say like the main two, Marvel and DC, it's like you wouldn't have that stuff if it wasn't for, you know, comic strips, even like political, you know, cartoons from, you know, the early, the 20th century, you know, late, you know, even in the 19th century, you know, you had different comics. So comic strips, I don't know, just when you're talking about it, I'm just thinking about that. So like, did you ever were you ever into reading like the Boondocks comic strip by any chance? Were you ever into that, or no, that never caught your attention?
No, yeah. I'm one of those people who like I saw the show. I dug the show. The show actually introduced me to the comics, and I read the comics, and I'm like, the comics are way better than the comics are better than the show. Um, and the comics was one of those things that, in addition to Penny Arcade, which that had me thinking, hey, I want to give this another shot. I want to like draw comics. So I'm glad I can say that the Boondocks comics has been kind of instrumental into me, actually starting my own comics and doing things like that. I think I've got one of the books behind me, somewhere over there.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like we don't realize how many inspiration we have until we really talk through it. So that's good to hear that, like, even though the Boondocks comic, you were introduced to the anime, once you got to the actual comic strip, you realize like, oh, this is a whole nother thing, actually just taking my time and reading it. So I was just wondering, like, what other inspiration do you have outside of, like, let's say newspaper comics? Were you ever inspired by some of the more mainstream comics or anime or manga?
Um, um, Not so much in the comic space.
Okay.
If I had like as far as like inspirations, and I didn't mention this before, don't know why, but I was also inspired by like a lot of early. I'm not even gonna say like early time frame because they're still going about, but like adult animated sitcoms. Um,
Mm,
Mm.
Even though Tyler's not adult, but very much like The Simpsons and South Park, the Family Guys, and all of those. Like, I think now my writing style, my sense of humor, like I want it to be on like the caliber of The Simpsons. Though people say that it's not as good as it used to be, it's still pretty good,
yeah.
and like even on the upswing again. So like those things have really like got me, not so much with the art but like with the writing and with the humor and the fact that it is humor. um I can't say much about anime because I'm an anime newbie, to be honest.
Hmm.
um like, to be absolutely honest, but I can say that like the contemporary shows like the Simpsons and South Park. South Park was a big one when I was a teenager. Lesser extent, Family Guy. Of course, Boondocks led me to reading the strips. Um, the Critic. Um, Even now, there were plenty of times where I would draw comics when I'm watching Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, the cool thing about all the stuff that I like then is still like around now. So it still gets me to this day.
Hmm.
So, would you ever want Beware of Toddler to be adapted into any other medium, or would you only want it to stay as a comic strip?
Oh boy.
Good question.
So if I had a bucket list, that'd be number one. Um, like I can tell you right now, I've thought about that a lot. Um, and to just straight up confess, I've started a Beware Tyler animation pitch Bible. Um, don't know what's going to happen with it. Don't know if it's going to go anywhere. But I thought about the animation thing. As a child, I wanted to do animation before I even wanted to do comics. Um, Never thought that was a viable path, so I went to comics. Then I grew to love comics, and now if I could do both, that would be great. But I've thought about it. I've thought about who I'd want to play who. I've thought about what kind of episodes. I've thought about music, because I there's so much that you can do with music in animation and other mediums, that you can't do in comics. And I think Beware Toddler would do really well in that aspect. Yeah, that's a big one. And that's one I think about pretty often.
Okay. And I was wondering, what advice would you give like newer creators coming into the field who are interested in either doing web comics, whatever, cartooning, or any kind of creative endeavor? What would be your advice to them?
Um, well, first and foremost, like especially with comics, um, it's very easy to create a comic these days. The first thing you should do when it comes to creating a comic is to just create the comic. Like, you can create it and then you can figure out how to do it the way you want to do it later. For like my learning style has been trial by error. I'd make a comic, it would be terrible and busted, and then I strive to make one better the next time. One day I'll make a good one, but but yeah, just make the comic. If you could do that, and then if you could understand that this process is not a sprint, and it will take time, and if you just be patient, if you just stay the course, hopefully you get everything that you want out of it. But if you decided to make a comic 3 weeks ago, and it's been 3 weeks, and you're like, why is nobody like liking my comic? Like, it's been 3 weeks, and that's just the way it works. Like, it's a process. It's like, for me, like, this is like year 18 for me, you know. And I know a lot of people love Toddler, but I was doing comics for 13 years before that. So understand that it's a process. Be patient. Head up. Have fun while doing it. Because if you're not having fun while making your comics, then that will show in your work. Um, and I've had those moments as well. So, just have fun with it, and as long as you like make that step, pick up the pencil and just get started. Like, that's the easiest thing. That's like the hardest part. So do that, and then everything else will just get easier and easier.
So have you ever had any moments where you were working on comics and it got so difficult where you're like, man, I'm almost ready to just be done with this?
Yes. Yeah, actually, like the year I created Toddler. So I basically told myself, because I'm like trying to let the hammer away at comics. It's been all these years, nothing's really popping. You get freelance projects here or there, and as much as it's easy to say, draw for the passion, which you should, but at the same time, bills need to be paid. So and my bills were not getting paid, and so I was just frustrated. So I was just like, you know what, this year is either going to be my best year or my last year. And that was the mindset I gave myself, because I put in over 10 years and nothing was really popping. I just happened to create Toddler that summer. But if you're frustrated, like, everybody gets frustrated. My advice is to, like, as long as you're having fun while doing the actual work, you'll be okay. You'll be cool. Just, you know, breathe, be patient. Understand, like, we all get frustrated. Everybody gets frustrated. Um, I know creators, like, the other day, was talking about their frustrations. So, like, just, stay the course. Be patient.
Okay.
Patience is definitely a virtue for sure. No, go ahead, Urban.
I was gonna say, now before we get into the second half of this interview, really quick, gotta go ahead and make our quick plug in for our sister show, The Honeycomb Hideout. It's a show where basically it's like Howard Stern for geeks. So for any of you guys out there who are looking for a good podcast to listen to, where we talk about industry news, what's happening, and whether it be in comics, whether it be what's happening in pop culture, the Honeycomb Hideout is where you're going to want to go ahead and check out with Joe and Christine. So make sure you give them a listen. It should be on Apple Music. It should be on Spotify. Pretty much all the mainstream apps that you can check it on. And we'll also be putting a link down below in the description. And now we are going to return back to the great George Gant. All right, now Che, you can go ahead and kick it off if you'd like.
Okay, no. Oh man, I'm having a brain fart. I had the question right in my head, but once we did the commercial break. Oh, I think I was going to go with not just the advice that you would give the young people. I know that was the question that I asked before, but you said you've worked on comics for 10 years prior. What are some of the other projects that you've worked on besides Beware of the Toddler?
Okay, so well, actually, I can talk about this one right now. So over the last 4 years, I've been working for the Beano magazine. That's the largest children's magazine in the UK.
Oh wow!
And so yeah, it's good stuff too. So it's funny stuff. Yeah, they've been around, like they just celebrated their 85th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like it's a lot over there. But I draw a comic strip called Angel Face. Um it's about like a girl detective, like she's like 9 years old and she's like a detective. So she does like little mysteries. So I do that every week. Um I just turned in my third cover for that magazine. So I do that. Um in the past I've done lettering and coloring work. Like my most prominent one was for this book called Hero Cats of Stellar City. It was an action lab book. Um so I think I lettered and colored like quite a few of those issues. I think I colored over Marcus Williams on one of those. In fact,
Hmm.
um, what else did I do? I did Toddler, did that. I'm actually working on a project right now that I cannot talk about, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
Um, but I will say that when that one is announced, you will know, and you probably won't even know it from me.
Hmm.
Oh,
Um,
I like to hear that.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's a good one and it's a big one. But I've just done like a lot of things like that. It's like inking, coloring, lettering books, a couple graphic novels here and there, a couple children's books here and there. Um, of course, my other two, my previous web comics, on the ground and the reset button. Um, and the books with that, because each of one of my web comics has had at least one book collection published. And yeah, that's like the major stuff. And there's I also did and it's not a Were Spider book.
Oh yeah,
Uh
we're gonna ask you about that one too. You
that
know,
was really a question. Yep, I have that actually. I bought that for my niece.
yeah,
Yep, so I have that. Yeah.
that was one of the most fun books I've worked on.
No.
And probably the second or third like full on comic book that I've drawn like with everything. But yeah, that was an awesome experience.
so before I ask you about that, I am curious. So, we talked to uh Kenji Marshall, about the the industry, and even he talked a little bit about working on a children's book before and how competitive the children's book industry is. Has that been your experience in terms of like working on comics that are aimed at a younger audience? Do you feel like it's more competitive than, like, I'm gonna say, like comics that maybe are more geared towards older audiences?
Um, I wouldn't say it's more competitive. Like with me, and especially with children's books, while I've worked on some, that's not one of those things that I actively seek out. Um, just from a time standpoint, like I always feel like I never have enough time to like really work on those kind of things. So I try to stay strictly like within the comic space and doing like shorter and like smaller type projects. But from what I've seen, especially like now, I wouldn't say so much children's books, but children's graphic novels, like those are kind of on the rise. So I can see like a lot of competition with that. I can't really answer the children's book question because I see children's books and I try to stay away, and then I get drawn to some every once in a while. Um, but I mean that said, when I am reach out with children's books, everyone, like 90% of the people that want to work with me, it's almost always about a children's book. So like if it's like that with me, like with everyone else, I can imagine it being like times 10 that.
Okay, okay.
And my question in regards to work, how long have you? I know you said you've been doing this for close to around maybe this is year 18 for you. When did you transition into full time comic book or cartoonist / comic book creator?
Full time. Um, let's see. That's actually a good question. I'd want to say within the last like 6, 7 years. Um, because I was when I started my webcomics. Of course, I'm working retail. At some point, I want to say 12 years ago. My oldest kid was born 12 years ago, and I was working in a restaurant. And I wouldn't say this was like full time comics creation, but I actually ended up quitting my job to just stay home with my child. Um, I got in a project there. Ironically, my first children's book. Uh, I could barely remember anything about it now. It was like a super small thing, but I thought like illustration. That's when I felt like illustration can be an actual career. Um, so I was really like a stay at home parent, but if I was doing anything, like it was trying to illustrate. I didn't really take it seriously until I want to say about 10 years ago when I had a publisher reach out to me. No, it's been a bit over that, but I had a publisher reach out to me. Hey, we want to publish a web comic. We want to um publish this in a book collection. Uh, so I guess you could say that's about the time where I started taking it more seriously, but it never really felt full time. Um, not until like years later, but that's when it felt professional. If that makes any sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. So that it took some time to really transition full time, coming from being a full time parent to transitioning. And like we talked about early in the interview with the work life balance with raising children and working on illustration, how is that working relationship like when it comes to family? Like, how are you able to like manage? Like, do they have an understanding? Like, okay, dad's at work right now. No, I know you have to put your youngest to put the kids to bed, but like, okay, dad's at work right now, or he's not available at the moment. How are you able to manage that where it's not interfering with your like creative space? Because we know as creatives, you need to sit and plan and think and just have time to kind of marinate in it. How have you been able to manage that while dealing with your personal life, like in house?
Oh, very, very poorly. They do not care if I'm working or not. They and it's just kids. It's what they do.
Of
Like
course.
whether I'm working or not, they will. Daddy, I need this. Daddy, I need that. You know what? It's part of the job. It comes with the territory. You just have to roll with it. Um, luckily for me, well, they're a bit older now, so it's not as bad as it used to be. My daughter still kind of has like no regards. Um, and they're in school now, so like when they're in school, that's when I get most of my thinking done. But it doesn't like there's no daddy's working, don't interrupt him. It's they will interrupt me, but I will roll with it.
Mm. So really just being resilient and being just understanding. Like, you know what, I'm a parent. This is what comes with it. I'm still gonna get it done. I'll just be able to manage. That's fair. That's good advice.
Yeah, and the cool thing because my comics are parenting focused, chances are they're going to give me an idea anyway.
Hmm.
So
So
are
win
you
win.
gonna do like a in the future like a like beware of teenager at the at a later point, you think?
I don't know if I do it like as a daily or weekly thing. Um, but I've done this before. Like I don't mind like dipping into like other time periods just to see what this might be like for like one offs. Um, like I think I did one where like it was like a fake future and like the Tyler and her brother because there's a brother character there, Amari, where they were like in the future and it was like a Terminator 2 parody. So it's not like nothing with real continuity. Just like if I did this, this is what I would do. One thing I did do that was kind of fun. It was an April Fool's joke. Every year I do an April Fool's joke. Uh, was I came up with this promotional thing for Beware of Senior. And the idea being is that the toddler is now a senior, and it's her grandchildren that has to wrangle her. And I just did like a little single image. I threw it up on Facebook, and people were like, "Is this real? Is this going to happen?" And I was like, "No."
April Fools, we got you.
And that was a good April Fools. That was fun.
No, that
So,
is.
I know you collaborated with Greg Anderson. I may be saying his name wrong, so I apologize, Greg, if I'm going to say your last name wrong, but I think it's Else. Is there any other creative out there that you are wanting to collaborate or you would love to collaborate with, whether they be, someone really big in the industry, like a Matt Groening or, even like an Aaron Magruder or someone out there that you are aspiring to create with?
That's a good question. That's one of those ones that I probably have one that I'm not thinking of right now. I will say that there is somebody in the industry, and nothing's been announced yet, but I am excited to collaborate with. Whenever that materializes, I won't say much because in the event that it doesn't materialize, which I think it will, but that's a really good question. Like, if there was anyone that I'd like to collaborate with, I don't know. Like, I know there has to be someone out there that's for whatever reason is just drawing a blank, but I'm trying to think of someone who would be able to do something that I can't, and for someone that I'd be able to do something that they can't. Like, one thing about collaborations, is a lot of people like the idea of collaborating when everyone does the exact same thing. So I'm trying to figure out a way to come up with somebody that I can collaborate with, and that it's beneficial to everyone.
So actually, that brings up another question. Then, what to you makes a great collaboration?
One where both parties or all parties, because they're on the same page. They bring something unique to the collaboration, while at the same time they're not so different to the point where you're just making a hodgepodge of anything. And I think, like, if you're collaborating with someone, you got to be able to communicate well. You got to be able to communicate with them well. And, like, just be cool and make sure everyone's putting in the work that they're putting in. And I think, like, that's probably the most, and be humble. Like, egos are not egos would be like a terrible thing, like, dealing with collaborations. But I think as long as you have those things, and I mean, you both have a vision, you both have, or whoever's involved has a vision and passion for what they're creating, I think that's probably like what will be best for the end product at the end.
Yeah, camaraderie is definitely important in the creative space. And if you don't have that, it's very hard to kind of get the work done. So my next question is still in regards to the creative space, but how do you practice self-care? Because I think that's something creatives struggle with, is even that. Just take care of themselves with the personal life, creative endeavors. How do you manage? What are some of your coping skills?
All right, for me, and that's a really good one, because a few years ago I got hit with a pretty serious illness, as a
Sorry
result
to hear
of
that.
thank you. I mean, I'm okay. I'll be all right, but as a result of not doing those things.
Yeah.
So for me, I have taken up, I'm like pretty big on like exercise and things like that. Which when you have a family, things like that can be pretty difficult. So and for me, and this is going to go back to our gamer conversation, I've taken up a lot of like VR based exercises.
Mm.
like Beat Saber, Supernatural is a really good exercise app, good workout app. Just making sure you're moving, that you're not being sedentary the entire time. Water, the right diet. Another thing I did is a few years ago I actually quit drinking.
Mm.
Um, and so just not like like the basic things like eating. I'm not saying eating perfectly healthy every single time, because when you want something, you want something, but understanding that there's a balance to have, and you need to make sure that you're putting in decent foods as much as you can, that you're moving about and you're exercising, drinking water. And those things are like kind of basic, but they're kind of important, because way too many of us are getting sick and passing away at such young ages.
Yeah.
And since I had my own scare, like I'm not playing around.
Yeah. So you made a conscious lifestyle decision,
Hmm.
and that kind of helps. So that's good to know, because I think that that's something creatives don't do a lot of, because I see it a lot just in the space where you hear about not just people in general dying, but creatives dying pretty young. You're just like, wow, like they created all these masterpieces, but they're not even able to like reap the fruits of their labor, because they put in all this work in this particular area, but then they've, you know, not taking care of themselves, and they end up
Overworked.
past result overworked. Exactly. So,
Yeah,
well,
you
I'm
People
gotta
think
glad.
have
making comics is easy, and it's not.
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, you got to have the balance. And one thing that people don't tend to understand is that, and I think I said it earlier, that comics takes a long time. Like,
Right.
just doing it in general. Like, 1 minute you're in your 20s, and then the next minute you're not, and you feel that. So it's just something that you want to be cognizant of sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, how long does it take for you to make a page?
It depends. It depends on like what it is, like the scope, and kind of just how I'm feeling at the time. Like a typical Toddler comic, maybe 4 or 5 hours. Um, Sometimes less if it's like less involved, or if it's like a single panel, things like that, or if I'm really in the zone. Uh, Sometimes longer, if I'm tired, or like I'm like stopping to work on something else, or I've got to juggle this. But I want to say like 4 hours is probably the average.
Okay.
Okay. And my question is, how? When did you start? When did you notice that you had support, or were you able to get support while being a creative? Like, how did you manage that?
Um, you know what the weird thing about being a creative is, like it is kind of like not great for your mental health if you're not taking care of yourself. So like even now I'm like, am I getting support?
Hmm.
but but with me, once I had people that I've never spoken to before, or never like really interacted with before, telling me, "Hey, I love this. This is going to be something," or "Hey, I've heard of that comic. I read it here, or I read it there," or uh, with one of the early comics, I cannot remember her name, but it was like a prominent person. But I can't remember her name right now to save my life. Actually, like posted one of the comics on Instagram, and it was like then where I thought, hey, this is like, this thing is getting love. And even now, um, like when you know what they say, like you're not really somebody until somebody recognizes you,
Right.
or something like that. Um, and it doesn't happen often, but whenever that happens,
Hmm.
that's when I feel like, hey, that's the most important. Not in terms of like money or anything like that, but you're being recognized by someone who, if you think about it, should not have the time to recognize you.
Yeah.
So that when those things happen, that's usually when I feel it the most.
Hmm.
So, A good example I'm thinking of that like probably would have been like when you got a Glyph, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I'm assuming the Glyph Award must have been a prolific moment for you.
It was both of them. Because I have two.
Oh
Um,
yes.
so one of them was during the pandemic years, and like nobody knew about it. Through no fault of his own, but the world was just crazy.
Right.
Uh, and the second one was in 2013, and those were big. Um, I want to say, as big as those were, the Ringo nomination might have like was up there as well.
Hmm.
Um, just because like where the Ringos are and where like the position of the Ringos in the industry, which also happened, during the pandemic. But the night of the Ringo Awards, um, I was in this stream with all the nominees, like a bunch of nominees, and like I am in there with like famous comics with famous creatives. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the glyphs. I cherish them. I am definitely going to try to get more. Uh, but during the Ringo thing, when I've got you know, when I'm sitting there in a room with Stan Sakai,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking like, okay, like, am I supposed to be here? Now, granted, I've actually had work published in a Usagi Yojimbo art book before, but to be in the same space as like people like that, and to be viewed in that regard was game changing. And that was before the Glyph Wiz anyway. So that was it. That was a big one. Winning the glyphs. I
You seem like from talking to you just this whole time, I definitely, feel the vibe that you're extremely humble. So how have you been able to remain humble after receiving that kind of success?
Oh no, I'm hiding my ego. Something awful. I'm gonna be real. Um, well, it's not. I would say this, like, it is like sometimes like some things you want to feel humble about. Some things you kind of want to feel like, hey, I did that. Um, it just depends on what you're doing and like where you are at the time. And like with the Ringos, like I never really sat back and thought about it until just now. Like, oh snap, I was in the room with these people. Like, of course, I didn't win anything, and that's disappointing. But like we're looking back on it, I was in a room with these people, you know, and that's for me coming from where I came from. I grew up on both the west and south sides of Chicago,
Ooh.
and you don't have to be from Chicago to know the reputation that has.
Yeah.
So, being from both of those areas and seeing where I am now is kind of like dang, dang, you know?
How did you tune that out? Like, how did you tune out the noise coming from those areas to focus in on your career?
Well, for me, I'm also lucky in the sense that when I grew up, it was the '90s. So while things were crazy then, we also didn't have social media.
Hmm.
So we didn't have social media, and as far as like the things that actually went on out there, um, it wasn't as wild. Things weren't as I don't want to say disorganized, but things were a bit more organized in those areas back then. Um, Also, I was a geek who liked video games and cartoons, so I spent all my time in the house watching cartoons and playing video games. Like I wasn't really outside like that. My siblings were, and they're fine, but that wasn't really my thing. So that kept me out of trouble, in my opinion. That kept me, you know, being a geek. I don't think people really understand like being a geek, and especially being like a black geek. You don't realize how much trouble you can stay out of just doing that. And
Yeah.
that was my own experience anyway.
No.
So
Same here. you grew up in a rough area, being from Detroit, something similar. I grew up in a corner house, so I knew what it was like to just see everything outside and be like, okay, I got to make a decision. I can focus on watching Dragon Ball Z. I can be a creative. I can draw. I can spend my time here, or I can put my energy into the negative parts of the neighborhood and get swallowed up in it. So it's good. Like, people don't understand that a part of the blurred, black geek, black nerd space is also kind of a safe haven for us in a lot of ways to kind of keep us, in a better space, and then put back into the community, because I'm pretty sure there are people who may have grown up with you or know of you and saw like, oh wow, he came from this block and he ended up doing this. That's still inspirational for the kids or even for other adults to say, oh, you know what? I could do something outside of what I see every day. And now I'm seeing people who look like me and come from where I come from. So, I mean, I just want to say, kudos to you. And that's very commendable to make it from where you came from and to be able to put the work in that you've put in. So I just want to congratulate you on that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we're getting ready to wrap up right now. We're going to head into our final question, our traditional question. So I can kick it off, or I can say the question, or you can say it, Jay. Who you want to
do? Irvin, you already started. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So at the end of your career, long span, you're old man, how do you want your career to be remembered? What is your end game? Just like Thanos said, snap fingers, what is your end game? What's your end game?
My end game. Of course, how my number one bucket list is like animation, things like that, or just working in different media. My end game is, I just, at the end of the day, I kind of just want something to outlive me. I mean, obviously, you have got family and children and things like that, but if you can have something that like to stand the test of time, like that's what I want. I want to be proud of everything I've done, and this might sound kind of hokey, and I know like how people will respond when I actually say it, but at the end of the day, I kind of just want to be somebody, and if I can do that, and if I can do it, and if I can build it, like I think, like I'd be proud. Of course, it'd be nice to have all my bills paid and to be stable and to not have to worry about, where my next paycheck is coming from. But if I can say that, hey, look, I made this. This is a thing. This is a thing that exists. Maybe it inspired the next thing to exist. But I became the people that I was inspired by. If I could become like the person that I was inspired by when I was a kid, like then I won.
Okay. So having a legacy, being a staple, I see that. So
legacy, just put that into bright lights. Legacy.
I like it. Legacy and bright lights.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, George, for coming on today. We really appreciate you. We appreciate you sharing, talking about things with us today, and just giving us insight on your creative process. Beware of Toddler. And bringing us a lot of joy and everything today. Before we go ahead and close out, where for anybody out there, because I'm sure a lot of people do know where to find you, but for anybody who doesn't know where to find you, they're interested in picking up not just Beware of Toddler, but any of your newer works, or just maybe they just want to follow you. Maybe they want to learn from you. Right. Where can they find you?
Okay, well, for Beware of Toddler, you can read Beware of Toddler on Comics Kingdom, comicskingdom.com/beware-of-Toddler, follow me at Beware of Toddler. Follow me at Gant Art. I'm constantly creating. I am constantly posting something like nearly every day. The comics are up every Sunday. You can read them usatoday.com/comics. You can read them in some newspapers. I don't know which ones, but they are in some papers.
That's good when you can just say that. Like they're everywhere.
Yeah.
They're in at least one paper. If you can find that one paper, it's there. If you're in the UK, check out the Beano magazine. Read Angel Face. I do a comic there every Wednesday. Other than that, if you follow me at Gant Art, I do have some things on the horizon that I will be sure to announce soon.
Alrighty.
Okay. Now, as we close out, real quick before you leave, George, we're going to go ahead and close out and then just stay after, just for a few minutes after.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to say to everyone out there, quick announcement. You know, for those of you guys who follow us, we do have our Origami Super Punch coming out pretty soon as well. So you want to make sure you guys go ahead and you check that out. We have the first one that has already been kind of in circulation on the con scene, and we do have that also that's going to be posting online for people to be able to, any of you guys to be able to pick up, which is an anthology with a bunch of different creatives. But we want to go ahead and one more time thank Mr. George Gant for coming on, you know,
Absolutely.
educating us, teaching us all, and we're looking forward to everything else he has coming. So anyway, guys, look out for the next interview we have coming out. Should be in a few weeks, heading towards the end of this season. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you guys next time.
All right. Have a good